User asks Reddit, Redditors who have worked around death/burial, what's your best ghost story? When my cousin was 18 he was in a bad wreck and him, his girlfriend and her sister were all pronounced dead at the scene. The police arrived to inform my aunt, his mum, and she asked that he be sent to a specific funeral home. While they were preparing to embalm him he raised up and asked, "Where the heck am I?" The funeral director said it was the first time he ever had to go home and change pants. I should add that the top of his head was open and his brain was exposed. He was sent to the hospital. The same police officer came to my aunt to tell her he was not dead but in the hospital. They thought he'd be in a vegetative state. But a few weeks later he walked out of the hospital. My aunt said it was the worst and best day of her life. Oh my god, he was actually alive. During my apprenticeship, I worked at a funeral home said to be haunted by an old funeral director assistant who had a heart attack in the building and died. All he ever did was mess with the chapel lights, and if you called him out, something like "John, the family is coming, please don't," they would return to normal. Not really sure if I believe it was really haunted, but saying something always fixed the issue, so I kept doing it my entire time there. I love stories of people talking to ghosts. My childhood home was haunted and the door to my grandparents' living room would crack open very slightly on its own. My granddad would always say something like, "Come on in and sit down, mate," and the door would open further and my grandma would yell at him. I'm pretty sure we have a ghost in our house. It doesn't seem harmful at all, so whatever. We're sitting in the dining room one evening and one of the lights had been flickering and bugging me. It's been doing this for a few days now but not consistently, just occasionally, and I mentioned to my husband that it's been bothering me. Cue the flickering beginning again. He looks at the light and yells, "Enough. Do I need to go get the sage out of my car?" And the light stopped flickering immediately and it lasted for a few days. I've got a ghost in my kids' bedroom. My kids have never slept in there, just play in there, and as long as I leave the lamp on and shut the door at night it doesn't act up. But dang, every time I forget she gets very annoying and makes noises all night. I've cussed it out a few times for not respecting boundaries. I used to be a driver for a funeral home corporation. Like, drive the hearse and pick up the bodies. Never had anything creepy happen, a few funny things, a few traumatic things. In general it was a chill job. However, I did get incredibly uncomfortable one night picking up a man who died at home. He still had the defibrillator leads on his chest and his eyes were closed, which is unusual because the eyes are always open. He just looked like he was asleep or unconscious. Not rigid or pale or anything. I just had this sinking feeling for about half an hour in traffic that he was going to suddenly gasp and wake up in the body bag. Then it hit me. That would be the coolest thing ever. I'd take him home and he'd be back with his family. So I just kind of drove slowly and turned up some music and sang along and talked to him. When I got him to the funeral home I left him out of the cooler for about an hour while I did paperwork and played on my phone. When I got another call I checked on him and his limbs had started to stiffen. I was kind of bummed. I put him in the cooler and went on my next call. I used to work on an oncology ward as a nurse. Our side rooms were kept for end-of-life patients on palliative care, and one patient that we had been nursing for a good few weeks died early one morning. Last offices had already been done by the night staff and the patient moved to the hospital morgue, so all that remained was to clear the room of personal belongings and tidy up. I sent a student nurse that I was mentoring at the time to do this whilst I got on with the drug round. The student had known the patient fairly well and was comfortable with this job. About 10 minutes after, a colleague came to me and told me that my student had come flying out of the side room white as a sheet and was sobbing in the staff room. I went to find out what the problem was and the student told me she had been clearing out sink area in the bathroom, had glanced up and seen the deceased patient reflected in the mirror looking at her over her shoulder. My student was a sensible girl, not given to hysterics, but for the remainder of her placement on that ward she would not go near that side room. There's a name for this phenomenon. Like if your dog dies, you'll constantly think you see him for a while after. And not just think you did, people will be absolutely sure of it. I still occasionally feel a cat that isn't there up on my legs in the exact pattern my childhood cat did. Don't care if it's psychosomatic, I choose to believe it is him. I had my old cat, my soul cat, put to sleep at home, and I hand to heart swear he stuck around for several days after. I could feel him nearby at times, and not just when or where I expected to find him, but randomly. When my other old cat passed 6 months later, I didn't have that feeling at all, although I miss her bunches too. She was just gone. I'm a palliative carer and who didn't believe in this stuff until I became a nurse. I have 3 to share at the moment. Before my time in palliative care I worked on a medicine unit at the hospital. One night I was returning from my second break around 3 a.m. or so and saw a man standing in the door of my patient's room. He was white, late 40s to mid 50s, dark hair which was graying, relatively fit, wearing a hospital gown. He was standing at the door with his arms crossed, and as I walked closer he turned and went inside the room. I followed because I knew it wasn't his room. Our unit was big, 36 beds, so it was entirely possibly he was a patient I had not met yet. Anyway, you can guess the rest. Went inside the room and he was nowhere to be found. I looked under the beds, ridiculous BC, someone couldn't hide there, in the lockers, washroom, behind the curtains. He was nowhere to be found. Later that night my co-worker had said she felt like someone was touching her feet when she tried to nap on her break. The break room was right next door to my patient's room, and she was in there at the time that I saw this patient. Not a specific ghost story, but I just want to say 2 things about working in palliative care. 1. Patients often introduce me to deceased relatives around them or talk about people waiting or being in the room with them. 2. A lot of people know they are going to die, and I believe much is seen/heard that folks don't talk about during this time. I believe this because in our younger patients who aren't ready to go, there is often a high degree of anxiety, and many times I have been asked by a younger patient to help me, I'm going to die today or similar. Once upon a time I was doing home hospice and a younger guy in his 50s was dying of occupation-related lung cancer. Anyway, I knew it was coming and asked his family if they wanted to invite anybody to say goodbye, so patient's 90-year-old father, brother, extended family and friends came over at about 1 a.m. and I left them and sat in the kitchen to give them privacy. As I'm in there I hear this massive burst of wind chimes which was kind of supernatural, as in did not stop, just a massive burst that went on and on instead of trickling here and there with the wind. A moment later his daughter came in to tell me he had passed away. I don't usually share my supernatural beliefs about death/dying with families, but I couldn't help but comment on the wind chimes later on, and his wife said yeah, he collected wind chimes. That doesn't surprise me at all, and turns on the light on the back patio, showing me literally hundreds of chimes which had been silent all night until he passed. Absolutely. I worked as a hospice nurse and it didn't take long to see many people had control over when they left. Waited for family to arrive, etc. I had one patient who went 3 days with no kidney function, pupils fixed and dilated, super low BP, who woke up and told me she had seen the other side, we would see each other again, she would be able to watch my life and she loved me. Told me to go home and rest because she was leaving by morning. 3 a.m. I got the call. Changed my entire outlook on life. My grandfather died a while back. One day me and a bunch of my cousins were playing in the front yard, rural area, since on weekends all the family likes to hang out together. So we're out having fun and see Lolo, grandfather, walking towards the house. We all greet him and he smiles at us. He walks up the porch into the house and hangs his hat by the door. We continue playing until we hear crying from the inside of the house and my uncle driving fast up the driveway. We all rush in to see what's going on and see everybody bunched up in the kitchen crying, telling us that Lolo died early that morning and they just found out. He lives a few towns away. We looked at each other and told the grown-ups no, we just saw him come into the house. They didn't believe us and we told them that he really did not that long ago, and he even hung up his hat by the door. So everybody rushes to the door and his hat was hanging right where we said it was. He doesn't ever go anywhere without that hat. So me and my cousins are running all over the house calling for him while our parents are so quiet and freaking out. He actually did die earlier that morning and my grandmother couldn't find his hat anywhere in their house. We left the hat where it was and nobody ever touched it. My roomie slash best bud is a mortician, and I'm around the funeral home a fair amount myself and know the staff pretty well. I've spent the night there before. Nothing weird happens there. I have had some experiences I can't explain, so I was a little surprised none of the staff ever had an odd experience, especially since some of them do believe in ghosts and whatnot. But they told me, if ghosts were real, why in the world would they linger at a funeral home? It's just a transition space, like an airport. No one wants to just stay in the dang airport. Haunt the place you died, or the people you love, or the home you never want to leave, or however it works, if it works. Who would want to linger in a funeral home they have no attachment to, that their body only visited after they already were gone? The running joke at the funeral homes I worked at, on the IT side, was people would haunt the florists because of how much they charge for stuff that will die not too long after a funeral. I never had any paranormal experiences, but it was still a creepy place to work. Mainly because I had to see the staff's browser history. LOL, I actually was a florist for years and did funeral arrangements. Some of them can be wild on pricing, but OMFG. They can hella disrupt the day for a small shop. They're huge and take all your stock, and the delivery drivers have to make a special trip for them half the time because each piece is so dang big nothing else can fit in the car. And then there's stuff like you'll try to source 4 dozen red roses for grandma's casket spray in February and tell me it's even possible. I help a friend out that has a small florist shop making deliveries on days like Valentine's and Mother's Day. It never fails that he'll also get orders for a funeral on the same days. It makes an already hectic day worse, plus it's always fun trying to get more flowers delivered on those days. I used to be a nurse assistant on a cancer floor that also served as the hospice floor. The number of times a patient would pass and be removed from a room, only to have that room's call light continue to go off without anyone inside was just nuts. And before you say maybe the light was just damaged or moved strangely in the process of removing the body, that's the only time it would happen. Broken call lights, in any other circumstance, just wouldn't come on at all. I was doing additional care for my husband's great-grandmother during the months before she died at an assisted living center. I became friends with some of the staff and they always said when there was a death the call light thing would happen in that room all night or for at least 24 hours. I'm not sure at this point if it's an urban legend or what, but it would also happen in rooms that had been empty for months on occasion. They never did seem to have call light issues in rooms that were occupied. I work in aged care and I had a palliative patient I was about to go check and the call light went off. I checked them about half an hour before with a co-worker. We both saw it and I said I'll meet you in there. We got in there and they had passed away. Not the first time it's happened. And then the buzzer would not turn off, that even the family made a joke about it as their person was always calling for us and very anxious. I was a nurse employed in nursing homes. Electrical disturbances weren't uncommon. I had a resident die during the day and when I came on shift that night, her call light started going off. Thinking the light connection to the wall had been disturbed when they removed her and cleaned the room, I visually checked it, unplugged it and plugged it in again and noted there was no issue. Less than an hour later, it's going off again. Knowing what I know, I go in and speak to her. I acknowledged her and what she was doing and told her I was really busy though and couldn't keep coming in there all night. It never went off again. Edit to add, I also had a patient let me know she was dead by call light. She had Alzheimer's. She could speak, but wouldn't know what to do with a call light if you explained it. Because of that, her call light often fell to the bottom of the bedside rail, where she couldn't reach it, and was left there. I saw something out of the corner of my eye one night. I look up, it's her call light going off. I think yep, she's dead. She was, and that call light was at the bottom of the bed rail, totally out of reach. Perhaps I am too late for this, but figured I'd share the story anyway. So my aunt married a man from a relatively well-off English family, who had purchased part of a large mansion house near Mylor, Cornwall, rural coastal area in the south of England. As a result, when I was younger we were occasionally invited down to spend a few nights there in the summer. It's a pretty idealistic location, with the house built on the side of a hill facing directly to the sea. As I'll explain, the house used to be a guest house, and has always been described as haunted by members of the local community. At the time of my experience, however, I didn't know the real reason why it was considered haunted, and I only found that out later. During renovations, for example, the builders had claimed to have seen the ghost of a woman in an old-fashioned dress walking down the stairs. One summer, I brought my now ex-girlfriend to the house with me, and we stayed in a bedroom on the ground floor. It wasn't an ensuite, so to go to the loo you would have to leave the room and walk across the hallway to the toilet across the way. In the middle of the night, my GF at the time wakes me to say that she's going to the loo and she'll be back in a moment. I sit up groggy-eyed in the darkness, say okay, and then lie down to go back to bed. She doesn't turn the lights on, but in the darkness I can make out her opening the door, leaving the room and closing the door behind her. I lie down, close my eyes, and about a minute later hear the door open again, and someone walk into the room. Assuming it to be my girlfriend, I don't open my eyes, but shift to make room for her to get into bed. I hear her walk over to the bed and get in, and I reach over to embrace her, and feel what feels like the body of a woman. My eyes are still shut at this point. Suddenly I hear a woman's voice from across from me, not my GFS, asking me, "Are you going to come tomorrow?" Realizing it's not my GF, I open my eyes in shock, and at that very moment my girlfriend opens the door to the room. I look across and realize there is no one in bed with me at all. I bolt up, and my GF has to spend the next hour calming me down while I explain what happened. The next day I tell my uncle about this and ask about why the house is considered is haunted. He laughs, saying I probably encountered a ghost of the people who used to stay in the guest house. I ask for an explanation, and he says that during the 1900s there was a terrible boating accident in this part of Cornwall, and a boat, the MV Darlin, totally disappeared with something like 30-odd passengers. A large number of the, presumably dead, passengers were staying at the guest house. Hence why locals all presume the place to be haunted. Having heard this, I could only explain it as the ghost of one of the passengers. Safe to say I avoided boats for the rest of that trip. I have a million that are more grotesque and gory than this one, but it stands out to me. I was once working at a mortuary and had to go pick up a man from the medical examiner's office. When you do that, at least where I'm from, you get a receipt when they release the body to you. The receipt has all of the personal belongings that are with the deceased. When I brought the man back to the office, I opened up the body bag to make sure all the belongings were there and double-checking the receipt. When I opened up the bag, I was stunned to find this dude looked almost exactly like me. He was my age, had similar tattoos in similar spots, had the same long hair I do, even had the same style of jewelry I was wearing. It took me so off guard that I stood there in an existential crisis until the embalmer came in and was like, "Hey Spartan Mo, oh how's it going? Ah holy shoot, that guy looks like you." It's the only case I've had nightmares about. I'll be the one in the body bag with the deceased man opening me up. I don't know if it would be a good idea or a very bad idea, but there's this mini-series with Paul Rudd called Living With Yourself. I'm gonna suggest you watch it anyway. Don't look up any spoilers, just watch it. I am a nice CUIN. We had a septic patient in the unit. She was 29 weeks pregnant. She went into labor on my shift and we delivered her baby, stillborn. I did post-mortem care on the baby, retrieved the proper transport container and walked the baby down to the morgue. It was the middle of the night, I'm in an elevator alone. I hear a baby start wailing. I absolutely lose my mind and rip open the cover, and just as I go to zip down the bag, I hear a calming male voice say, "Hush little one, I've got you, no need to cry." The crying stopped immediately. Shaking, I opened the bag and saw exactly what I expected to see, a deceased 29-week-only baby. I am a big bearded 40-year-old ICU nurse, and that was the scariest stuff I've ever experienced. No one believes me to this day. I don't even want to speculate what the crying or the voice was. God. Even typing that out I felt my chest tightening. I was in ICU and delivered my stillborn son at 29 weeks in August. His name was Henry. I'm going to take this as a good sign that someone was there to get him the night he was born. Thank you for posting this. While I was in nursing school, I worked as a night shift tech on a general hospital floor. Our sister floor became the COVID floor during the pandemic. One night we got a call from upstairs that a patient had passed away and they were out of body bags, so a nurse and I went upstairs to bring them one. On our way back to our floor, the elevator doors closed like normal, but the elevator didn't go anywhere. All of a sudden the doors opened back up and then closed again, and we were moving. We looked at each other and the nurse said out loud, "It's okay, we'll show you the way out." Hospital windows don't open like the old days, so I guess souls have to take the elevator.